Okay, so this part's not going to last the whole 45 minutes. What I want to do is, we've seen two central notions of computability so far. The notion of what it means for an omega word, an infinite word, to be computable, and what it means for a partial function on infinite words to be computable. And I want to go to the other modus operandi that we've been of Turing machines that we've been looking at throughout the course, and look at language recognition, but now in the context of omega languages, that's languages of infinite words, rather than languages of finite words. So the omega language is a set. It's not a set. It's a set of infinite words over the finite input alphabet sigma. And just in the same way that ordinary Turing machines recognize words, essentially we want to do the same thing, that we want to run a Turing machine, give it an input word, and test whether the word's in the language. And we want to get an affirmation that the word is in the language in the case that it really is in the language. Confirmation, if you like, that the word is in the language. So we're going to want to get that information in finite time. And we have this infinite output tape. But rather than using that, let's do the same thing that we did before and have a halting state, an accept halting state, and ask for, we're not going to really use the output tape. I mean, I didn't make it optional in the notion of Turing machine, but anyway, it doesn't matter. We don't need to use the output tape at all. So we're going to give ourselves an accept state, and we're going to recognize a word by halting in the accept state, even though it's an infinite word. But in finite time, we want to halt in the accept state. So, so we assume T2Ms for language recognition have distinguished accept states. Keep the same terminology as before, and we'll throw in a reject state as well, which we'll only use in the case of deciding a language rather than semi-deciding a language. So accept and reject states. And just as before, so it's basically the same definitions that we're used to now. So the language, the omega language, that's the set of infinite words. The language, the omega language recognized by a type 2 Turing machine M is L of M. Defined. Let me just check in my notes whether did I say L? Yeah, I do. L sub omega of M, just to emphasize it. So this is a curly L sub omega of M. The omega language recognized by M is simply the set of all infinite words over the input alphabet such that M halts in accept when given P as input. Everything all right? Yeah. And again, we'll say that, we'll simply say that N accepts P for this. And we're just going to have the usual definitions. So M semi-decides L. So this is not curly L, this is a set of omega words. M semi-decides that if L is the set of words the set of omega words accepted by M, so that is the language recognized by M. And M decides L if, well, L semi-decides L. And rejects every P that's an infinite word over the input alphabet that does not belong to the language L. And what it means for M to reject a word P is, of course, I won't write it down, that M holds in the reject state when given P as input. Okay, so basically the same definitions as before, no changes really, except that we're using type 2 Turing machines and our input words are infinite words. Okay? And as before, L is semi-decidable if there exists a type 2 Turing machine and that is the fact. Semi-decides it. Then L is decidable. Let's put that's a bit higher up. It's decidable if there exists a type 2 Turing machine that decides it. So no surprises really. And once again, the other fact we get immediately is that decidability is stronger than semi-decidability. That's immediately from here. So every decidable language is a fortiori, that means a stronger reason, it's also semi-decidable. Okay. Now, I want to make one remark about this. There's something special about the infinite case, and this is going to give a hint to some of you to think about what's going to come next week. Only for those of you who know the relevant topology to do it, but anyway, everyone can think about this first remark. So the remark is, the first remark is that if we accept a word, an infinite word, we're doing so by going into an accept state. That's the computation of a type 2 Turing machine. That happens after finite time. Because it happens after finite time, it means if we're accepting a given input word P, we can have only looked at finitely many symbols in P in order to accept it. And also in the decidable case, we can only look at finitely many symbols if we accept the word and also if we reject the word. In either case, we need to have made the decision based on finitely many symbols. So the suggestion for those of you who know some topology is to think about that and think about connecting that to open sets in the, well, sigma's a finite set, so you can give it the discrete topology. And we've got an infinite power of a finite set, a countable power. So there's a natural topology on that, the product topology of this set of infinite sequences. So for those of you who know some topology and you know about product topologies for infinite products, think about decidability and semi-decidability and think if you can make a connection with the product topology of the discrete topology of the finite set of the alphabet. The rest of you, I mean, you don't know that topology, it doesn't matter. We're going to do this from a more basic point of view next week and see some deeper connections with topological things. Right, so what I want to end with, rather briefly, is we've got these usual notions. We've got decidability, semi-decidability of now an omega language. We've got what it means to compute functions on omega words or partial functions on omega words, and what it means to compute an omega word itself. That's the new thing, that actually computing, having the notion of a computable element of data, if you like, an infinite word we think of as an element of an infinite data element. To have the notion of a computable data element, that's the new thing in this new model of computability that involves some computability on infinite data. Now, I said to you at the beginning that we don't need to introduce the type 2 Turing machine model. All of these concepts can be re-explained just using ordinary computability on finite words. Now, it gets a bit complicated when you're talking about what it means for a function on infinite words to be computable in terms of ordinary computability on finite words. And I'll leave that for you to think about by yourselves or for the exercise classes. In the lecture, I just want to consider the simplest case and show you how we can re-express the notion that an infinite word is computable in terms of properties we already know regarding computability on finite words. So reducing the definition we've got of computability of an infinite word to notions we already had earlier in the course. So I'll simply write the theorem or proposition. I'll check what I called it in my notes. Maybe it's a proposition. So it doesn't deserve to be called a theorem, or at least it didn't when I wrote the notes. And the proposition is that the following are equivalent for an infinite word. For any infinite word P over the input-output sigma. So what I want to do is characterize the notion of an infinite word being computable. So remember, computable meant, so just to emphasize, this is today's notion of computable, so by a type 2 Turing machine. So remember, computability meant there exists a type 2 Turing machine that with no input outputs this infinite word. And I want to explain that in terms of computability on finite words, what we've been doing earlier in the course. And P being computable, let's see which order I put. There are two statements that are going to be the same. I want to see which order to put them in. This is the same thing as saying that a certain language, which I'll call prefix P, the language of prefixes of P, the correct plural of prefix is prefixes. So the language of prefixes, is that right? Well, anyway, the prefix language of P, it is me. The English gets worse every week. So language prefix P is decidable. In fact, it turns out to be equivalent to the language prefix P, for all the same stuff, is semi-decidable. Rather surprising. A certain kind of language, decidability and semi-decidability turn out to coincide. But prefix P, it's not really surprising what the definition is. This is the set of all finite words over the input alphabet sigma, such that W is a prefix of P. So a prefix means a finite word which is the initial portion of the infinite word, an initial portion of the infinite word P. So i.e. W is P restricted to N. This means the first N sample would be for some N which has to be the length of W. So in fact, i.e. W is P restricted to the length W. Okay? So the language that's the set of all prefixes of P. So we'll prove this. It's quite a simple argument, and I'm going to give it at a high level, and then we'll be done for today. So P is computable, so there's a type 2 Turing machine that generates it, doesn't require any input. So 1 implies 2. Well, we did enough with the universal Turing machine about how we can simulate one Turing machine with another. It's not hard to see how to simulate a type 2 Turing machine. If we don't give it any inputs, we don't have any worry about how to simulate the infinite amount of information that's on the input tape. We don't have any inputs at any point in computation of the type 2 Turing machine. There are only finitely many symbols on the tapes. So if we don't have any inputs, we've got the type 2 Turing machine, we can simulate it on an ordinary Turing machine. So given a P2M that computes P, let's call our type 2 Turing machine M, that computes P. Simulate it on an ordinary Turing machine. And we're going to do that in such a way we want to decide the language prefix P, so this ordinary Turing machine which takes an input W and runs M in simulation until it has output the length of W many symbols on its output tape. Until it has output the length of W symbols. Okay, so hopefully you can see you can do this on an ordinary Turing machine. Simply run this type 2 Turing machine, and because it's input word for the ordinary Turing machine. On that ordinary Turing machine, we check how long that input word is. We simulate the type 2 Turing machine until it's output that many words, which is guaranteed to happen because the type 2 Turing machine computes an infinite word, so it outputs infinitely many symbols. So this is guaranteed to happen. And then we simply check that the length of W many symbols that have been output are the same symbols as the word W. So simply check that W equals the length W many symbols output. I am. And then return accept or return. Yeah, you simply go into the bilaterally go into the accept or reject state as appropriate. So it's a high-level argument, but you know, what we've already done with ordinary Turing machines, it's not that hard to turn this into a rigorous construction of a Turing machine that decides the language. Okay, so if P is computable, then this prefix language is decidable. Well, then if it's decidable, it's certainly semi-decidable because decidability is stronger than semi-decidability. So 2 implies 3 is trivial. So it remains to prove that it remains to prove that 3 implies 1. So now, so in this case, we assume we've got a Turing machine that semi-decides the prefix language. So 3 implies 1. So suppose M now, maybe I should have used different notation for the different kinds of Turing machine, but it doesn't really matter. So suppose M is an ordinary Turing machine. that semi decides the language prefix, the prefix language of P. So we want to construct a type 2 Turing machine that computes P. We construct a type 2M that computes P as follows. Now, type 2 Turing machines have some number of working tapes, so in particular, they can do anything a Turing machine can do, because the working tapes just act like a Turing machine. So a type 2 Turing machine is going to do lots of simulation of the Turing machine M. So I'm going to give again a high-level description. So suppose let's call this M twiddles. So suppose M twiddles, that's our type 2 Turing machine, has already output W. So we might record on the working tape the symbols that we've already on one of the working tapes, we might record the symbols that we've already output. So suppose you've already output W, and this is okay because we can get started with this at the starting point, we've already output the empty string. So that's how we get started. Suppose we've already output W, then what we do is we consider every possible continuation letter, continuation symbol from the alphabet sigma, from the alphabet sigma from which our word P is taken. And for each symbol, we run the semi-decision procedure for W followed by A. So we add A as the length W plus 1 character, or the length W index character of the word WA. So, well, let's say, suppose sigma is a finite alphabet, so suppose it consists of K symbols, A1 through to AK. And for each possible continuation word, we run the semi-decision Turing, we simulate the semi-decision Turing machine on that word. So we simulate M K times in parallel on the input words, one for each time we run M. So W followed by A1 and W followed by AK. So this is K different input words we give to the Turing machine. We give to the Turing machine M. So we're simulating that in parallel, which our Turing machines are not parallel, but we've already discussed this. We simply interleave the simulation of each Turing machine, doing one step from each one and going round a loop until eventually, if one of them halts, then it halts. But in fact, one of them will halt because we know by construction so far, M twiddles has already output W, which is a prefix of which is the word that which is the word P that we're talking about. Sorry, which is a prefix of the word P that we're talking about. So the word P is an infinite word. So exactly one of the possible continuations by a single letter will be a prefix of P. So the M machine that we're simulating will halt on exactly one of these, and then we output that character symbol as the next symbol output by our Turing machine. So M will halt on exactly one input word W A sub I, So M twiddles then hold, sorry, it doesn't hold, it needs to output infinite many symbols, it then outputs AI and goes back. So this is the loop here, goes back to the loop and goes back to the loop. How we done? Okay, so I've gone back to the statement of the proposition that we're proving. So you could perfectly well have not considered the notion, at least for the notion of computability, but you could do similar more complicated things also for computability of functions as well as computability of infinite words. So we could have considered, we don't need the notion of type 2 Turing machine, we could have simply said, well, the infinite word is computable if its prefixes are decidable or equivalently semi-decidable. But I hope you agree with me that that's much less intuitive what it's talking about. I mean, the notion of having a machine that outputs an infinite sequence is a very natural notion, and one that is sort of practical in the sense that these type 2 Turing machines really correspond to a model of computation that deals with stream processing. You have infinite streams as inputs, and you're producing infinite streams as outputs. Anyway, so I prefer, one sees that these are natural notions by considering the type 2 Turing machines, but nonetheless, from a mathematical point of view, that notion is not absolutely essential. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. And that's